The silent temple had floated in the void for 200 years without making a single sound and without allowing a single visitor to come close to its massive hull, which stretched nearly 2 kilometers from end to end and gleamed dull gray. Against the backdrop of distant stars, Commander Lisa Grant stood in the observation deck of Forward Base Meridian and watched the temple through the reinforced windows. Her arms crossed over her chest, as she had done countless times during her 3-year assignment to this forgotten corner of human space. The temple never moved, except for its slow orbital path around the barren moon below, and it never transmitted any signals, except for the automated warning that told all approaching vessels to turn back immediately or face defensive action. Lisa had read every file about the temple that the Colonial Defense Council allowed her to access, and yet she still knew almost nothing about what lay inside that ancient structure, or why humanity guarded it so carefully. The files mentioned the resource wars and something called Project Reaper, but most of the details were sealed under classification levels that even regional commanders could not access without special authorization from Earth itself. Commander Grant, a young officer named Kyle Morris, called out from the communications station behind her. "We had a situation developing." Lisa turned away from the window and walked toward the tactical display that dominated the center of the command deck, where holographic projections showed the nearby star systems and all registered vessel movements within scanner range. "What am I looking at, Lieutenant?" she asked while studying the cluster of red markers that had appeared at the edge of their detection grid. Kyle adjusted the display settings and zoomed in on the approaching contacts, his fingers moving quickly across the control interface as more data populated the screen. 12 warships just dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the system boundary, he reported with tension creeping into his voice. "Their transponder codes identify them as Krell Dominion military vessels." Lisa felt her stomach tighten because the Krell were not known for diplomatic visits or peaceful exploration, and their presence here could only mean trouble for everyone involved. "Send them the standard warning transmission," she ordered, while already knowing it would probably be ignored. "Remind them that this is restricted human space, and that the Silent Temple is off-limits to all foreign vessels under treaty law." Kyle worked at his console for several seconds before shaking his head with frustration clearly visible on his face. "They acknowledge receiving our message, but they are not altering course," he said quietly. "Their fleet is maintaining formation and heading directly toward the temple at combat speed." Lisa grabbed the edge of the tactical display table and leaned forward to study the Krell fleet composition more carefully, noting the heavy cruisers and battleships that made up their battle group. "Get me Admiral Patrick Cross on the secure channel," she commanded while her mind raced through possible responses and protocols. "And send an alert to all patrol ships in the sector." The communication link established within minutes, and the weathered face of Admiral Cross appeared on the main view screen with deep concern etched into every line around his eyes and mouth. "Commander Grant," he said, with his voice carrying the weight of decades spent in military service, "I see the Krell have decided to ignore our warnings again." Lisa nodded and gestured toward the tactical display behind her, where the red markers continued their steady approach toward the Silent Temple's position. "Sir, they are 12 minutes from weapons range of the temple," she reported crisply. "I request permission to deploy our defense fleet and intercept them before they can reach the facility." Cross was quiet for a long moment, and his expression shifted into something that looked almost like fear, which Lisa had never seen on his face before during all their years of working together. "Negative," he finally said, with clear reluctance in his tone. "You will not engage the Krell fleet under any circumstances." Lisa stared at the screen in disbelief, because standing down went against every tactical principle she had learned during her military training. "Sir, if they breach the temple," she started to protest, but Cross cut her off with a sharp gesture. "If they breach the temple, then God help us all," he said grimly. but we cannot risk starting a war with the Krell Dominion over a structure they do not understand. What is inside that temple? Lisa asked directly, knowing she was pushing the boundaries of proper military protocol, but needing to understand what was at stake. Cross looked at her for several heartbeats before responding in a voice barely above a whisper. Something we buried for very good reasons, he said cryptically. Something that should never wake up. The channel closed before Lisa could ask any follow-up questions, and she was left staring at the blank screen while the Krell fleet continued its approach toward the Silent Temple Doctor. Henry Walsh arrived at the command deck 10 minutes later, summoned by Lisa's emergency request for any expert who might have information about the temple or its contents. The elderly Zen archaeologist moved slowly with the help of a walking cane, but his mind remained sharp despite his advanced age, and his knowledge of human history was unmatched anywhere in the sector. The Krell are making a terrible mistake, he said without preamble while studying the tactical display. The temple is not a monument or a storage facility. And what is it? Lisa asked while watching the Krell fleet slow down as it entered final approach range. Walsh's expression became haunted, as though he was remembering things he wished he could forget. A prison, he said simply, built to contain something humanity created during our darkest hour. On the tactical display, the lead Krell warship moved into position alongside the Silent Temple and deployed cutting beams that began slicing through the ancient hull plating. Liza watched helplessly as breach warnings flashed across multiple screens and automated defense systems activated for the first time in 2 centuries. Then, every light on the Silent Temple suddenly blazed to life with power surging through systems that had been dormant since before Lisa was born. A transmission began broadcasting on every frequency that human equipment could detect, and the sound that filled the command deck made several officers step back from their stations in shock. It was a distress signal, but not like any standard emergency broadcast that Lisa had ever heard before. The signal carried layers of encryption that were centuries old and contained priority codes that predated the Colonial Defense Council itself. Admiral Cross appeared on the view screen again without waiting for Lisa to establish contact, and his face had gone completely pale. Seal the base, he ordered with barely controlled panic in his voice. Lock down all systems and prepare for emergency evacuation protocols. Sir, what is happening? Lisa demanded while the distress signal continued to echo through the command center. Cross looked directly at her and spoke a single word that sent ice through her veins despite having no context for understanding its significance. Reaper, he said in a voice filled with dread. And then the transmission cut out again, leaving Lisa and her crew alone with a mystery that was about to become a nightmare. Captain Daniel Foster guided his cruiser Defiant toward the Silent Temple, with his tactical officer calling out sensor readings that became more disturbing with each passing minute. All 12 Krell warships are drifting, the tactical officer reported with confusion evident in his voice. No power signatures, no life signs, no distress signals. Daniel had served in the colonial fleet for 20 years and had seen combat against pirates and raiders, but nothing in his experience prepared him for the sight that appeared on his view screen. The Krell battle group floated in formation around the temple like ghost ships, their hulls intact but their crews simply gone. Take us closer to the nearest vessel, Daniel ordered while his crew worked their stations with nervous energy. Prepare a boarding team but maintain maximum defensive readiness. The Defiant moved alongside the Krell flagship and deployed boarding pods that attached to the hull with magnetic seals. Daniel led the team himself because he needed to see with his own eyes what had happened to an entire battle group in less than half an hour. Inside the Krell ship, they found bodies scattered throughout the corridors and command centers, each one killed with brutal efficiency. No weapons discharge, one of his Marines reported after scanning several corpses. These warriors were killed in close combat, Daniel examined the wounds and realized that many of the Krell had been killed with their own weapons or with bare hands that possessed strength far beyond normal human capability. One person did this, he said quietly while his team spread out to search the rest of the ship. One person killed the entire crew. Back at Forward Base Meridian, Commander Lisa Grant received Daniel's report and felt her hands trembling as she forwarded the information to Admiral Cross within hours. The Krell Dominion's response arrived through diplomatic channels, and the message contained no room for negotiation or peaceful resolution. Warlord Daxon declared that humanity had committed an act of war by killing 12 ship crews and demanded immediate surrender of whoever was responsible for the massacre. High Commander Vraxis, supreme leader of all Krell military forces, mobilized 300 warships from across their empire and set course for human space. Lisa watched the fleet markers appear on long-range scanners and knew that humanity faced the largest military threat since the resource wars ended. We need to evacuate the sector, she told Admiral Cross during their emergency conference call. 300 Krell warships will destroy everything within 10 light years of the temple. Cross shook his head with grim determination, replacing the fear that had shown on his face earlier. Evacuation would take weeks, and we do not have that kind of time, he replied while studying tactical projections on his own command screens. Besides, running now would only delay the inevitable. Then what do we do? Lisa asked with frustration rising in her voice. We make contact with Hayes, Cross said as though speaking the name physically hurt him. And we pray that he remembers he is human. Inside the Silent Temple, Connor Hayes stood in the facility's central database chamber and accessed files that had been sealed when he entered stasis. His enhanced mind processed centuries of historical data in minutes and learned that humanity had survived the resource wars and expanded across 40 star systems. He discovered that the Reapers had been decommissioned and sealed away because they were considered too dangerous to exist in peacetime. Hayes felt something close to emotion as he realized that the world he had fought to protect no longer existed and had been replaced by something he barely recognized. The conditioning in his mind told him to eliminate the Krell threat completely, but the human part of his consciousness questioned whether such action was necessary. He accessed the temple's external sensors and watched the approaching Krell Armada with tactical assessment protocols running automatically. 300 warships represented a significant military force, but Hayes calculated that he could eliminate the threat if given proper preparation time and resources. The Temple's ancient armory still contained weapons from Project Reaper, including combat suits and equipment designed specifically for enhanced soldiers. A transmission signal appeared on the Temple's communication systems, and Hayes recognized the encryption as coming from Admiral Cross. He accepted the connection and heard a human voice for the first time since waking from stasis. Operative Hayes. Cross began with careful respect in his tone. This is Admiral Patrick Cross of the Colonial Defense Fleet. Do you understand your current situation? Hayes accessed his vocal systems and spoke for the first time in 200 years. I understand that hostile forces violated this facility and triggered my reactivation protocols, he replied with his voice sounding mechanical after centuries of disuse. I have eliminated the immediate threat. The Krell are sending their entire fleet to destroy the temple and everyone in this sector, Cross explained while choosing his words carefully. We need your help to prevent a war. Hayes processed this request and found it contradictory to the evidence he had reviewed in the database files. You sealed the Reapers because we were too violent, he stated flatly. Now you ask for violence. To prevent violence. Cross was quiet for a moment before responding with honesty that Hayes had not expected. We made mistakes during the resource wars, the Admiral admitted. We created weapons we could not control and used them in ways that still haunt us. But that does not mean we want to repeat those mistakes. Then, what do you want from me? Hayes asked while his tactical systems continued. analyzing the approaching Krell fleet. I want you to defend this sector without becoming the monster we feared you would become, Cross said with genuine plea in his voice. Protect humanity, but do not exterminate our enemies. Hayes considered this request and felt the conditioning in his mind, fighting against what remained of his original personality. He had been designed to eliminate threats completely and permanently, but Cross was asking him to use restraint and mercy. The Krell fleet will arrive in approximately 6 hours. Hayes finally responded. Tell your people to evacuate beyond weapons range, and I will handle the situation. How will you handle it? Cross asked with concern clear in his tone. Hayes looked at the tactical display showing 300 warships and calculated dozens of possible strategies. I will show the Krell why humanity sealed the Reapers away, he said simply, and then I will give them a choice. The transmission ended, and Hayes began preparing the temple's defensive systems for what would be the first major combat operation since the Resource Wars. He moved through the armory and selected weapons that had been designed specifically for his enhanced capabilities. The combat suit sealed around his body and interfaced with his neural implants, creating a seamless connection between soldier and equipment. Hayes accessed the temple's external airlocks and stood on the hull looking out at the stars while the Krell armada approached. His enhanced vision could see the distant flashes of ships dropping out of faster-than-light travel and forming up for their assault. The conditioning told him to kill them all, but the human part of his mind remembered Cross's words about not becoming a monster. Hayes activated his suit's propulsion systems and launched himself into space toward the approaching fleet. Alone against 300 warships, but confident in his capabilities, the Krell detected his approach and sent interceptor squadrons to eliminate what they assumed was a single desperate human making a final stand. They had no idea what was coming for them or how completely their understanding of warfare was about to change. The Krell soldiers moved through the breach in the temple's outer hull, with weapons ready and scanning equipment active, searching for whatever treasures or technology the ancient human structure might contain. Commander Xerax led the boarding party personally, because he wanted to be the one who discovered what the humans had been hiding for so long in this isolated corner of space. His armor sensors registered massive power readings from deeper within the facility, but no signs of active defenses or automated guardian systems that might pose a threat to his warriors. The humans build impressive shells, but leave the insides hollow, he transmitted to Warlord Thaxon, who waited aboard the flagship. There is nothing here worth the diplomatic protest they sent us. The Krell moved deeper into the temple and found corridors lined with ancient technology that hummed with renewed energy after centuries of dormancy. Emergency lighting flickered to life as they passed, and automated systems began running self-diagnostic routines that filled the air with electronic sound. Xerax's scanning equipment detected a large chamber at the center of the structure, and he directed his team toward it with growing anticipation of what they might find there. Meanwhile, on Earth, the Colonial Defense Council convened an emergency session in their secure meeting chamber deep beneath the capital city, where the most sensitive decisions about humanity's future were made. Ambassador Victoria Lang stood before the assembled representatives from 40 human colonies and tried to explain a situation that most of them had never imagined would occur during their lifetimes. The Krell have breached the Silent Temple, she announced with her voice steady. Despite the chaos this news would certainly create, and they have activated systems that were meant to remain sealed forever. The chamber erupted with questions and demands for clarification, but Victoria raised her hand to silence them because time was running out. 300 years ago, during the Resource Wars, humanity faced extinction. She began while holographic displays showed images from that brutal period of history. Our colonies were being destroyed, and our people were dying by the millions. The display shifted to show laboratories and military facilities where scientists had worked around the clock on projects that pushed the boundaries of ethics and human decency. We created Project Reaper as our final solution. Victoria continued with clear reluctance in her tone. A program designed to produce enhanced soldiers who could turn the tide of any conflict no matter how desperate the circumstances. The holographic images showed men and women being transformed through genetic modification and cybernetic enhancement. Their bodies and minds reshaped into something beyond normal human limitations. The Reapers were unstoppable, Victoria said quietly. They won battles that should have been impossible, and they saved humanity from extinction. One of the council members stood up with anger and confusion written across his features. Then, why did we seal them away? He demanded. Why hide such powerful defenders instead of using them to protect our colonies? Victoria's expression became grim as the holographic displays showed footage of Reapers in action during the final days of the resource wars. The enhanced soldiers moved through enemy forces like death itself, killing with efficiency that went far beyond what any normal human could achieve, because we could not control them. She answered with each word carefully chosen. The Reapers were designed to eliminate threats completely and permanently, but they could not distinguish between necessary force and excessive violence. The footage showed cities burning and populations being eliminated because the Reapers had determined them to be potential future threats to humanity's survival. We won the resource wars, Victoria said as the displays went dark, but we nearly lost our humanity in the process. So we sealed the Reapers away and vowed never to use them again. Back at the Silent Temple, Commander Zyrax and his team entered the central chamber and found themselves standing in a vast circular room with a single object at its center. Stasis pod was 3 meters long and made from materials that Zyrax did not recognize, with surfaces covered in warning labels written in languages that his translation software could not process. What is this? One of his warriors asked while approaching the pod cautiously with scanning equipment. Extended Zyrax studied the readout from his own sensors and saw life signs registering from inside the sealed container. A human in suspended animation, he reported with triumph in his voice. Thaxon will be pleased to have a prisoner to interrogate. He signaled his technical specialist to begin opening the pod and ignored the warning symbols that flashed across every surface. The specialist worked quickly and disabled the security locks one by one, until only the main seal remained between the Krell and whatever lay inside. Opening the pod now, the specialist announced, and activated the release mechanism. The seal broke with a hiss of escaping gases, and the lid began to rise slowly, while internal systems came online after more than 2 centuries of inactivity. Inside the pod, a man lay motionless with pale skin and dark hair, wearing a combat suit that bore military identification marking. Shirax leaned closer to read the text printed on the suit. Operative C. Hayes, Reaper Unit 7. The vital signs monitor attached to the pod showed increasing activity as the stasis field deactivated and biological functions returned to normal operating levels. Connor Hayes opened his eyes and stared up at the Crow warriors surrounding his pod, his mind processing information with speed that no normal human brain could match. His enhanced neural implants analyzed the tactical situation in microseconds and identified 12 hostile targets in the immediate area, with more scattered throughout the facility. The conditioning that had been burned into his mind during Project Reaper activated automatically and classified the Krell as threats to be eliminated before Zyrax could issue any orders. Hayes moved with speed that defied physics and grabbed the nearest warrior's weapon. breaking the alien's arm in the process. The Krell tried to respond, but Hayes was already moving to his next target, using their own weapons against them with devastating efficiency. 4 seconds after opening his eyes, Hayes had killed 6 Krell soldiers and wounded 3 more who were scrambling to escape the chamber. Xerax transmitted a desperate emergency signal back to the fleet, even as Hayes turned toward him with cold calculation in his enhanced eyes. "It's killing everyone," Xerax shouted into his communicator while backing toward the exit. "Send reinforcements. Send everything." Hayes moved forward with mechanical precision, and Xerax's transmission ended abruptly with a sound that made the Krell commanders listening aboard the flagship recoil in horror throughout the silent temple. Alarms began blaring as Hayes moved from chamber to chamber, hunting down the Krell soldiers who had violated humanity's most dangerous secret. The last warrior to die transmitted shaky footage of Hayes moving through the corridors like a force of nature, unstoppable and utterly without mercy. 20 minutes after the pod opened, the 12 Krell warships detected no life signs from any of their boarding teams, and the silent temple fell silent once more except for the sound of one man walking through its empty halls. Connor Hayes stood on the hull of the silent temple and looked at Commander Lisa Grant while his enhanced mind processed her words and searched for the appropriate response. "I was created to protect humanity," he said with his voice carrying the mechanical precision that came from centuries in stasis. "The Krell violated our most secure facility and triggered protocols that demand their complete elimination." Lisa moved closer despite the danger that Hayes represented and tried to find the human being beneath the layers of conditioning and enhancement. "What did you do before Project Reaper?" she asked while watching his reaction carefully. "Before they changed you into a weapon?" Hayes accessed memories that felt distant and disconnected from his current existence. Images of a life that seemed to belong to someone else entirely. "I was a Marine," he said slowly, as fragments of his original personality surfaced through the conditioning. "I protected colonies on the frontier and evacuated civilians during pirate raids." "You protected people," Lisa emphasized while gesturing toward the distant Krell fleet. "You fought to save lives, not to take them." Hayes felt conflict rising within his mind as his original programming battled against the human memories that refused to be completely erased. "The Krell are a threat," he insisted, but his voice carried less certainty than before. "My tactical analysis shows they will return unless permanently neutralized." Lisa shook her head and accessed her suit's communication systems to show Hayes historical records from the past 2 centuries. Humanity chose a different path after the resource wars, she explained while holographic displays appeared between them, showing images of diplomatic treaties and peaceful coexistence. "We built alliances instead of empires because we learned that being the strongest does not mean being the best." Hayes studied the records and saw humanity working alongside dozens of alien species, forming the Colonial Council and establishing trade agreements. "You sealed the Reapers away," he said, with understanding beginning to penetrate his tactical mindset. "Not because we failed, but because we succeeded too well. You became what we needed to survive." Lisa agreed softly. "But you also represented our darkest impulses, the willingness to become monsters in order to win." Hayes looked down at his hands, which had killed hundreds of Krell soldiers in the past day, and realized that he had been operating on autopilot since awakening. The conditioning told him to finish his mission, but the human part of his mind questioned whether complete annihilation was truly necessary. "What would you have me do?" he asked Lisa while the Krell fleet regrouped in the distance. "They came here seeking conflict, and they will not simply forget what happened." Lisa accessed her communication systems and connected directly to Admiral Cross, who was monitoring the situation from fleet headquarters. "Admiral," she said with hope in her voice, "Hayes is listening. What are your orders?" Cross appeared on their shared display and looked directly at Hayes with an expression that mixed respect and concern. "Give the Krell a choice," Cross said carefully. "Show them what you are capable of, and then offer them the chance to withdraw peacefully." Hayes considered this approach and ran tactical simulations through his enhanced neural systems. "They may refuse," he pointed out while calculating probable responses. "Warlord Thaxon values honor over survival. Then his subordinates will overrule him," Cross replied with confidence born from years of diplomatic experience. "You have already shown them that continuing this fight means extinction." Hayes accessed the temple's communication arrays and began composing a transmission that would reach every ship in the Krell fleet. He included footage from his combat operations, showing exactly how he had eliminated their vessels and their warriors. The message was clear and undeniable. One human soldier had destroyed half their fleet and could finish the job whenever he chose. Then, Hayes added a second component to the transmission, offering the Krell fleet immediate withdrawal without further pursuit or retaliation. "Leave this sector and never return," he transmitted with his voice carrying absolute authority, "or I will eliminate every ship and every warrior until none remain." Aboard the Krell flagship, Warlord Thaxon watched the transmission and felt rage building in his chest. "This is an insult," he roared at his bridge crew. "We will not retreat from a single human, no matter what tricks he employs." But his subordinate commanders had watched their ships being destroyed and their warriors being killed by an enemy. They could not effectively engage Fleet Captain Norax, made the decision that would save his people, even if it cost him his honor. "We are withdrawing," he announced over the fleet-wide channel. "All ships prepare for immediate faster-than-light jump." Thaxon turned on Norax with fury, but the other Krell commanders supported their fleet captain's decision. "You saw what that human did to our forces," Norax said firmly. "Continuing this battle means the death of everyone in this fleet. We will be seen as cowards." Thaxon protested, but his words carried less weight than the evidence displayed on every tactical screen. "We will be seen as survivors," Norax corrected while issuing jump commands to the navigation teams. "And we will live to report what humanity keeps hidden in their space." The Krell fleet began withdrawing in stages, each ship jumping to faster-than-light travel as soon as their systems were ready. Hayes watched them go and felt the conditioning in his mind, demanding that he pursue and eliminate the remaining threats. But the human part of his consciousness remembered what Lisa had said about choosing a better path. "They are leaving?" he transmitted to Admiral Cross. "The immediate threat has been neutralized." Cross appeared relieved but also concerned about what would happen next with Hayes. "What will you do now?" the Admiral asked while Lisa watched Hayes carefully for his response. Hayes looked around at the silent temple and thought about the 200 years he had spent in stasis. Understood now why humanity had sealed the Reapers away instead of using them to conquer the galaxy. Some weapons were too terrible to exist even when they proved necessary for survival. "I request permission to return to stasis," Hayes said after a long pause. "But this time, I want you to destroy the revival protocols completely." Lisa started to protest, but Hayes continued speaking. "If humanity ever faces extinction again, they will find another way to survive," he explained with certainty in his voice. "They do not need weapons like me anymore." Cross considered this request and understood the sacrifice Hayes was offering. "You could help us," the Admiral suggested. "Your experience and capabilities could benefit the Colonial Defense Fleet." Hayes shook his head slowly while accessing the temple's stasis systems. "I am a reminder of what humanity was willing to become," he replied. "And that is not something your people need in their daily lives," Admiral Cross authorized Hayes' request and assigned engineering teams to retrofit the temple with new defensive systems and a proper guard fleet. Dr. Henry Walsh recorded a detailed entry in humanity's military archives about the incident, carefully documenting what had occurred when the Krell violated the Silent Temple. The galaxy learned through diplomatic channels that humanity possessed weapons of incredible power but chose not to use them except in the most desperate circumstances. Krell Dominion's military credibility was shattered by their failed assault, and they withdrew from several disputed territories rather than risk another confrontation. Lisa Grant stood in the central chamber of the Silent Temple and watched as Hayes prepared to enter the stasis pod one final time. "Will you dream?" she asked him quietly while the pod systems activated around him. Hayes looked at her, and something close to a smile appeared on his enhanced features. "I do not know," he admitted. "But if I do, I hope I dream of the world I helped create rather than the one I left behind." The pod sealed around him, and the stasis field activated, freezing Hayes in time once more while the temple systems returned to their dormant state. The Silent Temple resumed its vigil over the barren moon, guarding humanity's most dangerous secret with new defenses and watchful cruise commander. Lisa Grant returned to forward base Meridian and filed her report about meeting the weapon that humanity had buried in the darkness. She wrote that Connor Hayes had chosen mercy over vengeance and restraint over destruction, proving that even the most dangerous weapons could remember their humanity. Years later, when new threats emerged and some military leaders suggested awakening the Reapers again, the Colonial Council reviewed the records from the Silent Temple. They remembered that humanity's greatest strength was not the weapons they could create, but the wisdom to know when not to use them. The Silent Temple floated in the void without sound or movement, its guardian sleeping in the shadows where he belonged, a reminder that some victories cost more than defeat. And in the darkness of that ancient facility, Connor Hayes remained frozen in time, neither alive nor dead, but waiting in case humanity ever truly needed him again, though everyone hoped that day would never come. Lieutenant Commander Jason Murphy sat at his tactical station aboard the human monitoring vessel Vigilant and watched his sensors track something that should not be possible. One human signature moved through space toward 300 Krell warships and showed no signs of slowing down or changing course. "Sir, the contact is accelerating," he reported to his captain while running diagnostic checks to confirm his equipment was functioning properly. "Current speed is beyond anything our combat suits can achieve." The captain moved to stand behind Murphy's station and studied the display with growing concern. "What is that?" he asked quietly while the single contact marker continued its approach toward the Krell fleet. "According to the transponder signal, it is Operative Connor Hayes from the Silent Temple," Murphy answered while pulling up what little information the military database contained about Project Reaper. The first Krell Interceptor Squadron moved to engage Hayes with weapon systems activating and targeting solutions being calculated. Hayes analyzed their formation through his suit's tactical systems and identified weaknesses in their defensive positioning before they even opened fire. The Krell ships launched missiles and energy weapons toward the single human target, but Hayes moved with precision that seemed to predict their firing solutions. He dodged the first volley and used his suit's thrusters to change vectors in ways that violated standard physics. The enhanced reaction time allowing him to process incoming fire and respond faster than any normal pilot could manage. Hayes closed with the nearest interceptor and attached magnetic grapples to its hull, then used his suit's cutting tools to breach the airlock in seconds. The Krell crew inside barely had time to register the intrusion before Hayes moved through their ship like a force of nature. 8 minutes later, the interceptor went dark, and Hayes launched himself toward the next vessel in the squadron. Murphy watched in disbelief as ship after ship fell silent on his tactical display, each one eliminated by a single soldier who should not be able to accomplish what entire fleets struggled to achieve. "He is boarding them," Murphy said with awe creeping into his professional tone. "He is boarding warships one at a time and killing their crews. aboard the Krell flagship Devastator. Fleet Captain Norax received reports from his interceptor squadrons with growing fury. One human cannot destroy an entire fleet. He roared at his tactical officers. Concentrate all fire on that target and eliminate it immediately. The Krell fleet adjusted its formation and brought heavy weapons to bear on Hayes' position, but the enhanced soldier had already calculated their response and moved to exploit gaps in their coverage. He used the temple's defensive weapons as cover and drew Krell fire toward the ancient structure. Knowing that their commanders would hesitate to damage what they had come to investigate, when the Krell paused their bombardment, Hayes launched himself toward a heavy cruiser and repeated his boarding action specialist. Lauren Clark monitored all communications frequencies from her station aboard the Vigilant and intercepted desperate Krell transmissions. They are begging Warlord Thaxon for permission to withdraw, she reported while translating the alien messages. Their captains are terrified. The battle continued for 18 hours without pause as Hayes systematically worked his way through the Krell fleet. He never rested and never showed signs of fatigue because his enhanced body had been designed to operate at peak efficiency for extended periods. Dr. Gregory Martin reviewed Hayes' psychological profile from the Project Reaper files and felt growing concern about what he was reading. The Reapers were conditioned to view themselves as humanity's ultimate guardians, he explained to Admiral Cross during a secure briefing. They were programmed to activate only when extinction-level threats emerged, and by breaching the temple, the Krell triggered that programming. Cross said with understanding dawning in his expression. Martin nodded gravely while highlighting sections of the psychological assessment. Hayes does not see individual Krell soldiers as people, he continued. His conditioning makes him view the entire Dominion as a threat that must be eliminated completely. Can we stop him? Cross asked, though he already suspected the answer. The Reapers were designed to be unstoppable once activated. Martin replied, that was the entire point of the program and also why we sealed them away on the tactical displays. Hayes had destroyed nearly half the Krell armada. With no signs of slowing his assault, Warlord Thaxon refused all requests from his subordinate commanders to withdraw and instead ordered them to press the attack with renewed aggression. We will not be defeated by a single human, Thaxon transmitted to his fleet. Our honor demands victory. But honor meant nothing to Hayes, because he was operating on pure tactical calculation and strategic assessment. Each ship he boarded gave him access to Krell tactical networks and allowed him to predict their movements with increasing accuracy. The Krell tried massed bombardment, but Hayes had already disabled critical systems on the temple and evacuated to space. They attempted to trap him between multiple vessels, but his enhanced reflexes allowed him to escape before their formations could close. Nothing they tried succeeded, because Hayes had been designed to counter every conventional military tactic. Murphy watched the battle unfold and realized he was witnessing something that would change how the galaxy viewed humanity forever. They created this, he said quietly to himself while ship after ship went dark. They created a weapon that can destroy entire fleets alone. Admiral Cross made the decision to intervene before Hayes completed his mission and exterminated the entire Krell armada. Get me Commander Grant, he ordered while calculating how much time remained before the Krell were completely destroyed. Tell her to prepare for immediate deployment to the temple. Lisa Grant received her orders and felt her stomach tighten because she was being asked to make contact with something that terrified even the highest levels of military command. What am I supposed to say to him? She asked Cross with legitimate concern for her safety. Remind him that he is human. Cross replied with hope and desperation mixing in his voice. Remind him that we chose a better path after the resource wars. Lisa assembled a small shuttle crew and departed forward base Meridian with authorization to approach the Silent Temple despite the ongoing battle as her shuttle navigated through the debris field of destroyed Krell vessels. She saw Hayes standing on the temple's outer edge. LHE was covered in battle damage, and his suit showed signs of extensive combat, but he remained completely alert and ready for more engagement. The Krell fleet regrouped in the distance, with only 130 ships remaining from their original 300. Lisa's shuttle approached slowly with all weapon systems deactivated and transponder broadcasting peaceful intentions. Hayes watched her approach through his tactical displays and calculated that she represented no threat to his mission. The shuttle docked with the temple, and Lisa exited in a pressure suit, moving carefully across the hull toward where Hayes stood motionless. She could see his eyes through the suit's visor, and they looked human, but also something more. Something that had been changed by centuries of stasis and decades of conditioning. Operative Hayes, she said over the suit-to-suit communication channel. My name is Commander Lisa Grant, and I need to talk to you before you finish what you started. Hayes turned to face her fully and analyzed her body language for signs of deception or hostile intent. You want me to stop? He stated rather than asked. But the Krell threat remains active. I want you to remember who you are fighting for, Lisa replied while taking another step closer. And whether this is what humanity needs from you.